Hello, BookTube. Well, it's day 2 of BookTube-a-Thon, the massive BookTube event organized by Artemis, in which for 7 days a large chunk of BookTube turns itself over to sort of reading along the same themes, kind of getting on the same page or close to it. And here on day 2, I have begun to detect distantly from the provinces the first flickerings of rebellion. I've noticed a couple of "Wake Me When BookTube-a-Thon is over" little memelets cropping up here and there. I'm not sure that people are clear on the concept here. Ariel Bissett has many thousands of subscribers. She is the queen of BookTube. If she tells you that you're going to have a good time for the week, then you'd bloody well better do that. Saying otherwise is akin to rebellion. It's akin to heresy. What's wrong with having a little fun all together? Jeez, you people. But anyway, the challenge for today, there's a little informal challenge for every day. And the challenge for today was to read a hyped book. And of course, I had a million to choose from, but I chose this one. I chose Artemis by Andy Weir. His follow-up to The Martian, his novel that was a runaway success and then became an even bigger success when it became a Hollywood movie starring Matt Damon. It's just the absolute gold seam in the vein there for any author to come across, that your book becomes an unexpected bestseller and then is opted by an A-list Hollywood star and made into a hit movie. That can make you. And of course, it once that happened, it added a huge amount of interest to this book, to anything that he's going to do next. And so I read Artemis, which is a science fiction adventure starring a young woman named Jazz, who ekes out a living on the one and only lunar colony, which is called Artemis. And the reason that she ekes out a living is because it's not an equal society. There's the dregs who live along the fringes, and then there's the super wealthy. It's basically the lunar equivalent of Abu Dhabi. So you have these glitzy malls that only rich people can afford to even set foot in, and then you have the underclass of people that service the colony, but don't get to any of the rich pickings of its glamour and glitz. And so Jazz is she spends half her life on the borderline of the law, on either side of the law. And the adventure that sparks off this novel immediately becomes more complicated than it looks on the surface. And I don't want to give anything away, because I think the series is going to continue. But she's immediately called upon to question most of what her life was based on, and also in what is obviously now an Andy Weir shtick, she's called upon to think on her feet, to basically reinvent the mechanism by which she will survive even until tomorrow, which is the exact same thing that Mark Watney, the main character in The Martian, has to do for page after page. And seeing it done a second time reminded me of all the things that bothered me about it the first time. It's, when you're talking about Artemis by Andy Weir, BookTube, it's virtually necessary to talk about The Martian. And specifically now to kind of look back and blink and see it. Now that it's not a phenomenon anymore. Now that it's not, who's this author? Never heard of this before. What's this book? Where's this come from? Wow, what a big thing. New York Times bestseller. Wow, what a big thing. Matt Damon movie, special effects, funny. Now that all that is over, now that this author has joined the ranks of authors who are simply churning out books, it might help a little. I certainly couldn't help but look back on The Martian and remember all the things that I didn't like about it. First of all, how crappily it's written. It's just one lazy, tired, idiomatic cliche after another, for page after page after page after page after page. There's all sorts of cool gesture signaling, but nothing that's actually cool. And on top of that, probably the worst offending thing here in The Martian was that once the main character is accidentally stranded on Mars and realizes that if he has any chance of surviving until his own crew can come back for him, he's going to have to, there's a line in the movie, there's a line in the book, it boils down to he's going to have to apply hard science in a rigorous way if he's going to live. And in the book, I remember reading it the first time. I remember reading it before I knew nothing about the book at all. So I actually thought that a Martian was going to appear in the book. I love the fact that the Martian is Mark Watney. I love that. But in the book, at the beginning, I didn't know that one way or another what was going to happen. And I got to that scene where he says, I am going to have to use, he doesn't quite say it this way. He says, I'm going to have to use science to figure this out, to survive. And I thought, wow, well, that's kind of interesting. Of course, I don't see how it's possible. From what you've already told us about what's in the rover and the habitat, there's no way that you could. And then he proceeds to not. What happens after the character explicitly declares that he must now use science to survive, which is the author throwing down the gauntlet and saying, now I am going to show you my research, but I'm going to show it to you in an inventive way, but I'm not going to stray from it. I wouldn't have the character invoking science if I weren't about to employ science. And then Mark Watney does one thing after another that simply would not be possible. So, stuff, including two things in particular that come to mind, that would have been far-fetched even in a science fantasy novel, like something out of Gordon Dixon or something like that. So there's that. There's also the fact that there are no characters in the book. Everybody is just a carrier vessel for badump one-liners, for Hollywood bottom of the script page thumpers to get you to turn the page and move on to the next page in the script. Every single line, every single character develops is being delivered not by the character on the page, because they're nothing. They're not even one-dimensional. Instead, every line that every character delivers on the page is delivered by the actor or actress that Andy Weir had in mind when he wrote them. And that gets tiresome after a while, especially when two things. One, if you're in my position, you're remembering tons and tons of great science fiction, including tons of great science fiction revolving around the planet Mars. And two, if you're knowing in the back of your head that for this book, it's going to be the introduction that a lot of people have, not just young people, to science fiction just in general, that a lot of people are going to read this and think, wow, well, I've been ignoring this genre until now, but if this is as good as it gets, I'll definitely keep reading it. And when that happens to an author, when they pull that kind of crap and then it's eaten up by the public and lightning strikes them, just blasts open a hole in a field, and all of a sudden their life is completely different. Student loans paid off, mortgage paid off, children's school taken care of until they're in postgrad, you name it. Once that happens to an author, that author has two paths that can follow. Two paths that diverge in a wood of yellow journalism. You can either write that book again, figuring, well, the last thing I want to do is kill the goose that laid the golden egg. Or you can say, well, now that I want for nothing, I will try. I will risk. You can do one of those two things. Or, if you're somebody like Elmore Leonard or Graham Greene before him, you can do both for the rest of your career. God bless them. Artemis has all the faults of The Martian and no strengths. It does not build on anything. And it is clearly intended to be posited in a lot of lunar science. And there are holes all over the science. Holes that even if you don't know anything about lunar science, I was a NASA geek in my time. I had very good reason to be. So even if you weren't in that position, even if you knew nothing about the technology involved in building a lunar habitat, there are still going to be things in this book that are going to make you say, oh, come on. That wouldn't be true, would it? In other words, not to make this video go on too long, but in other words, Day 2 of BookTube-a-Thon, for me, was much like Day 1. It was a disappointment. I don't know how well this book will do. I imagine it will sell hundreds of thousands of copies based solely on the strength of the fact that most readers, understandably and I think legitimately, will buy a new book by an author who's pleased the daylights out of them, because that feeling feels great, and you can't predict it. to those readers, I might say, a far better approach to recapturing that feeling than blindly buying a new novel that is going to disappoint you would be to find one or two book critics whose opinion you have learned to trust and take their word for it. That way, you're spending $1 for whatever venue they're publishing in instead of $30 on a hardcover that you're never going to finish. but John and Mary Q. Public in America and in Europe have no idea that there are even such things as book reviewers. So I'm probably wasting my time. But unfortunately, that's the long and the short of it. I don't want to give away spoilers to the end of this book. Andy Weir is in that position for me. He did give me a novel that, for all its flaws, I was just like everybody else. I loved the daylights out of The Martian. Loved it. So I don't wish any ill on him. If this book is a runaway success, if it does for him and the moon, and whatever Hollywood actress is going to play Jazz, if it does all of that again, wonderful. Happy to hear it. But in terms of popular science fiction that actually reaches millions of readers, it just makes my eyeballs ache to think that this is what a lot of people are going to think science fiction is. So day 2 of BookTube-a-Thon, read a hyped book, was a dud. Same as day 1. Day 3 will be different. Almost certainly. The odds are 3 times in its favor as of today and yesterday, because day 3 is to finish a book in one day. And as those of you who might be new to the channel maybe don't know, that's not a problem for me. So one of the books I finish tomorrow will almost certainly not be a dud. I gotta hope. I haven't picked them out yet, but I will report back on day 3. It can only go up from here. Thank you, BookTube.